fellow bookworms. I'm Brittany.
And I'm Hallie.
Welcome back to our Abyss Book Club.
We're really excited that you can join us this time to talk about Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. We are very excited about this book, as you can probably tell from all of our comments on other episodes and maybe even our social media. We're very excited about this book. We want you to be able to dive into this with us.
Don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Instagram to get all the updates for these episodes and our normal episodes. Don't forget to stay tuned until the end of the episode. We will be announcing next month's book, so you can be sure to pick that up. And we'll also have links for this month's book and next month's book on our website.
So to kick things off, we're going to kind of follow the same structure we did for the first episode. We're going to talk a little bit about Delia Owens herself. This was a fictional debut for Delia Owens. She had written a few other books that were nonfiction based on her research and time spent in Africa, but this was her first fictional debut. She spent most of her life outside enjoying nature and exploring areas in Georgia. She just really grew fond of nature. She ended up getting her Bachelor of Science in Zoology and then her PhD in Animal Behavior, so she was really knowledgeable on the environment and the interactions between animals. She even worked as a wildlife scientist in Africa for a while. Some of the nonfiction books she wrote were called Cry of the Kalahari and The Eye of the Elephant, also Secrets of the Savannah. She really looked at hyenas and lions and elephants while she was there and really gave back to the scientific community.
Yeah, she had some wild adventures while she was in Africa. And one thing that she and her husband were really passionate about was poachers. So they would do everything they could to try and stop poachers and try to deter them. And her husband would go so far as to get in his little plane and fly around to try to find poachers. And they really wanted to protect as many animals as they could. And while they were there, Delia's husband was actually implicated in the murder of a poacher. I think it was while they were filming a documentary. Eventually, they were asked to leave the country because, unfortunately, the government in some of those areas really sides with poachers and there's a lot of corruption there and stuff. So rather than have that be super publicized, they were just asked to leave the country altogether. The case is ongoing. He's never been officially charged with anything, but there's an article that sort of describes their entire time there and that whole situation that we'll have linked on our website. So if you're interested in her life and what she's done and that situation and how it might mirror some of her fiction writing, I would definitely go check that out. It's a long one, but it's really interesting.
Yeah, and she now lives in Idaho with her family, and she's starting to dive more into this fictional writing that we see in Where the Crawdads Sing. Delia herself said about this book, quote, "Where the Crawdads Sing is a mystery, a love story, and a courtroom drama, but it is primarily about self-reliance, survival, and how isolation affects human behavior. Since our species is a social mammal, we have strong genetic tendencies to belong to a group of tightly bonded family and friends," end quote. You can just see right there how her scientific mind really influenced the structure and the basis of this novel. And I think that it's just what makes it that much better.
So the summary from Amazon and Apple Books is, for years, rumors of the Marsh Girl have haunted Barkley Cove, a quiet town in the North Carolina coast. So in late 1969, when handsome Chase Andrews is found dead, the locals immediately suspect Kaya Clark, the so-called Marsh Girl. But Kaya is not what they say. Sensitive and intelligent, she has survived for years alone in the marsh that she calls home, finding friends in the gulls and lessons in the sand. Then the time comes when she yearns to be touched and loved. When two young men from town become intrigued by her wild beauty, Kaya opens herself up to a new life, until the unthinkable happens. Where the Crawdads Sing is at once an exquisite ode to the natural world, a heartbreaking coming-of-age story, and a surprising tale of possible murder. Owens reminds us that we are forever shaped by the children we once were, and that we are all subject to the beautiful and violent secrets that nature keeps.
This book just felt like I had so many connections to it. Not only did Brittany and I both study marine biology, but we also live in North Carolina where the book was based. So we really have this direct contact with the things she discusses in the book.
Yeah, we both definitely grew up loving animals and nature, and you even grew up kind of in the marsh, right?
Yeah, I used to live on the water and I would always go out and play in the marsh mud and kayak, play with the crabs, all that fun stuff.
So yeah, this book hit home for both of us in a lot of different ways. And that was a really cool connection to have, because sometimes books like this, like even good books, even books that you really like, you just don't have that personal connection to.
Yeah, and in this book, she just showed so much appreciation for the ocean and the planet, and really talked about the simple beauty that lies in a place where a lot of people think of it to be nasty and smelly and yucky and muddy, but it's just so beautiful when you look into the details of it all. And she really took that out and visualized it for readers. And for me personally, growing up in that kind of setting, it's easy to take stuff like that for granted. But when I was reading her book, it really brought a new form to what I had grown up with or what I see regularly doing marine biology. And it created more appreciation for it.
Yeah, we talked about it a little bit, but even if you've never seen a marsh, I think that Delia Owens' descriptions of things can really put anyone in that sort of situation. So for some people, it's like the nostalgia of having been there and knowing what that's like. But I think for people who have maybe never even seen that, she just describes things so intricately and so beautifully that you can't not just be drawn into the scene that she's painting.
Exactly. You are there touching the sand with her, feeding the seagulls, hiding in the grasses, feeling that salt water all over you, laying in the shore. You're there with her while she's doing everything. And I think that the book itself was a good reminder for all of us to just look outside of our windows and admire what a beautiful world we have.
Yeah, like you said, people take for granted the marsh, but people also take for granted everything, even the beach, mountains, and all landscapes like that. If you live there, or if you don't live there and never see it, you just don't think about how much life there is there and how much goes into every single environment.
And there's even a really pretty quote from the book that was, quote, "Autumn leaves don't fall, they fly. They take their time and wander on their only chance to soar," end quote. And that in itself just shows you to appreciate the dead leaves that are falling outside. You think, oh, well, they're just leaves. You step on them, they crunch, you kick them, you see them falling sometimes or blowing in the wind, but you don't really think about appreciating that they're flying. It's so vivid and so beautiful.
Yeah, it reminds you that even the smallest thing is just incredible, that we live in a world where we can see the leaves change and fall, and we can see these little animals, and it's just, nature's so incredible, and we forget that so often. Even we forget it, I think, and we've studied that for years. We've been studying animals and nature and the ocean, and it can be hard to look at that scene and just see every little intricate detail. But it's every tree, every hole in the ground, every square inch of marsh is just teeming with life and really interesting little elements. And I think that's definitely a good reminder for everybody to just appreciate your surroundings and try to just stare out your window sometimes and see what's going on.
You'll have to forgive us. We get a little nerdy about this topic.
Yeah, I know. It reminds me of sometimes when we go to the beach and we just look out and we talk about how you look at the surface and there's nothing going on. You're the ocean. But if you think about how much life is below the surface, and there's so many different fish and plants and whales and all kinds of stuff below the surface, but you just don't see it when you're just looking out.
It's every nook and cranny has life, and it's beautiful. In this book, it was also really well written how Kaya was comforted by nature. It was that she couldn't get this comfort from her family and from friends because she was so isolated, that she ended up finding comfort in nature, which is gorgeous.
Sometimes with that kind of thing, it seems like nature is really harsh, and nature, just wants to destroy, or is just kind of unfeeling or whatever. But for Kaya, it nurtured her and it really held her when she had nobody else. So I think that was a really beautiful description too, because so much in stories, it's tossed out to nature is such a negative connotation and such a scary and dangerous thing. But for her, it was everything.
It makes me think of her as a little seed that's just getting planted. And once it was planted there in the marsh, it just grew into the beautiful woman that she became.
One quote that we really liked from the book sort of describes what we just said, and it's, quote, "Sometimes she heard night sounds she didn't know or jumped from lightning too close, but whenever she stumbled, it was the land who caught her. Until at last, at some unclaimed moment, the heart pain seeped away like water into sand, still there, but deep. Kaya laid her hand upon the breathing, wet earth, and the marsh became her mother. end quote.
And that's gorgeous too, just the way that it says she stumbled and the land caught her. You think like you stumble and you fall and you hit the ground, don't kick someone while they're on the ground, you know, all this stuff. But she says she stumbled and she fell and the land caught her, as if the land grabbed her and comforted her and was like, I'm not going to let you fall.
Yeah, there again, it was nature was everything she needed when she had nothing else.
Personally, when I read a book, I love books that make you learn the storyline as it goes. So in this book, it was constantly jumping back and forth between this murder of Chase Andrews to Kaya's childhood, and then back to Chase Andrews, and then back to Kaya's childhood. And I just really loved that balance. And I loved the process of the story as well, when it would go from the struggles of the family, then it turned into more a love story and coming of age and her becoming a woman. And then it became more intertwined into this mysterious homicide investigation.
I agree. I liked how they developed the story and both timelines came together. So you really got an idea of not just what was happening, but how it came to be for Kaya and the other characters in the book, and how they all grew up and dealt with the hardships there and things like that, and how that contributed to what happened later. I really liked that.
And I feel like you could really connect with Kaya all throughout the story. Hopefully not the end of the story though, since she was on a murder trial, but all throughout the story I feel like you could really connect with her on the level of insecurities or love of nature, or maybe it was independence and self-reliance like Delia Owens said she was trying to go for. You could just really connect her in some aspect.
I think there were a lot of universal truths in that book, just someone wanting to belong and trying to find her place and dealing with insecurity, just wanting to be loved and dealing with people with less than honorable intentions and things like that. That's stuff that we all deal with. So I think even if you can't really put yourself in the shoes, so to speak, of the Marsh Girl, there's a lot of just universal things that we all deal with that we can connect to. I think it takes a good writer to be able to weave those universal things into a story like this, where it's like a lot of people aren't going to relate to living in the marsh by yourself as a child and being on a murder trial and stuff like that, but you can relate to the broad things that she's going through.
Also, I was just thinking, and if you consider all the aspects of this book, murder, love, isolation in a marsh, child abuse and neglect, and you think about putting all of that into a story, it sounds like it would just be all jumbled up and nothing would work cohesively, but she did so well with it.
Yeah, there was never a time where I was kind of pulled out of the story by jumbled writing or something not making sense. Like, it was so cohesive, it flowed so well, everything fit together perfectly. It was just a really, really well written book.
Also, I loved how Tate helped her learn how to read and helped her publish books for her collections. And if you notice in the book, her speech as a character develops with her as she's learning from Tate. And I thought that that was just really well done as well.
Yeah, their relationship and how it grows is just the sweetest thing I've ever read.
I also really admired the twist at the end where she actually had murdered Chase Andrews. It really threw me off because during the readings, I didn't know if she had done it or if she hadn't. There was reasonable doubt, but it also didn't seem like something Kaya would do. I was pretty torn between which way to think about it.
Yeah, I was too, and I thought that was cool because it's not a twist that you can necessarily see coming, because I feel like it pushes you in a lot of different directions and you're like, well, probably not, but maybe. And then once you finally get the confirmation, you're like, wow.
Yeah, and speaking of the confirmation, it being through a pseudonym that she used, Amanda Hamilton, to publish these poems was also brilliantly done. That Tate didn't even find out about it until she had passed away. She took the secret to her grave. The poem that she did write is really intriguing to listen to after you know what she did. And it says, quote, "The firefly. Luring him in was as easy as flashing valentines. But like a lady firefly, they hid a secret call to die. A final touch, unfinished. The last step, a trap. Down, down he falls, his eyes still holding mine until they see another world. I saw them change. First a question, then an answer, finally an end. And love itself passing to whatever it was before it began." End quote.
Which that's just such a powerful quote in relation to, you know, when you know what happened and everything.
And it just solidifies that she really did set up this trap. She really did go on that tight schedule that seemed really unlikely. She drove on the bus that night, went, set a trap, killed him, and went all the way back on the bus in the same night. It seems so unrealistic, but she did it.
She was severely underestimated just as a person her whole life. Everyone thought she was dumb and couldn't put together something that's sophisticated. So I think that played into it too.
That's a really good point too, that this was something that they didn't believe she was capable of.
And not to get back on the science stuff too hard, but another thing we thought was really cool from the book, the references to animal behavior. You can really tell her science background with this book, with the fireflies and her various descriptions of animal behavior and physiology and things like that. It's also very foreboding that she mentions fireflies early on in the book and about how the females will use dishonest signals to kill. And then she calls the poem later the firefly. So that was a lot of foreshadowing, which is very interesting to look back on once you know the full story.
Yes, I agree very much. And another good topic to kind of talk about in relation to the book itself was the audio versus the hard copy of the book.
Yeah, as usual, I always go for the audiobooks if I can, and you always go for the hard copy. I think in this case, the narration was probably one of the best I've ever had. And I know I was talking to my mom about this book, and she said that too, that the narration really made the book and really helped it come alive. So if you're into audiobooks, I would definitely recommend that.
Yes, and personally, I read the hard copy book and it was beautiful, great imagery, an amazing read, but I finished the book before Brittany did. And when we were in the car one time on our way back from one of our little trips, she started listening to the audiobook, and I realized like the audiobook was gorgeous. The way it was narrated really put things into a different view. The sentences provided a different type of imagery when listened to rather than read. As strange as it sounds, it just came across differently.
Yeah, so that's a pretty good recommendation from someone that doesn't normally go for audiobooks. So
check.
So definitely, if that's something that appeals to you, I would go for it, because it's just such a beautifully spoken book, such a beautifully written book. And when that comes together, it's just so powerful.
And before we get to the crime aspects of the book and how they relate to true crime that we know about, we're going to leave you on a quote from Delia Owens that says, quote, "When you can feel the planet beneath your toes and the trees moving about you, you must listen with all your ears, and I promise you will hear the crawdads sing. In fact, it will be a chorus," end quote.
So the first crime or true crime aspect that we saw about the book was obviously reasonable doubt. Like we said, throughout the whole book, until you have that confirmation at the very end, there's so much reasonable doubt, even in the reader's mind, that she did this, that she could have done it, and all of that. Merriam-Webster's definition of reasonable doubt is a doubt especially about the guilt of a criminal defendant that arises or remains upon fair and thorough consideration of the evidence or lack thereof.
Which is correlated perfectly along with the book, that everything was just speculation. They speculated that she came back. It could have been her in the bus. It could have not been her. Would she have had time to make it back? Sure, but did she miss the bus? What if she was late? You know, everything was very up in the air. And we see that in a lot of cases as reasons why people don't get convicted of a crime, is because there's too much ambiguity. Another way this correlates to true crime is through cold cases. Obviously, this case with Kaya in the book is going to be left as a cold case. She took it to her grave, and Tate was going to do the same thing. He destroyed all evidence that she had even done anything, and it was going to remain a cold case forever unless they found DNA evidence to be able to close the case officially. This relates a lot to true crime. There's so many cold cases out there. Now, we don't know if they will remain cold cases forever. Hopefully not. We want these cases to be solved, to get criminals out of the streets, to give closure to families, but you never know with certain cases how long it'll take or if it will ever become closed.
And certainly there's a lot of cases, unfortunately, that the perpetrator will take that information with them to the grave and it'll never come out. And we've seen that before, cases that most likely will never be solved just because the people involved are no longer here. It's interesting too, because in the book, I think most of us were rooting for Kaya, obviously, but in true crime stuff, obviously we want those crimes to be solved. So that shows you how having emotions tied in can sort of muddy the waters there a little bit. Obviously, Kaya put a lot of thought into this crime and premeditating it, making sure all the pieces fell together nicely. So premeditation is a big part of the crime in this book and a lot of other crimes too.
Yeah, premeditation was a big part of this incident in the book, as well as families covering up the murder, which does happen in true crime a lot. You hear about parents, mothers who don't want their son or their daughter to get in trouble and would just rather lie for them and cover up for them. It kind of makes them an accessory to the murder itself, and that's what Tate does here. He covers up for Kaya.
As Kaya grows up, and even when she's an adult, Kaya faces a lot of abuse and even sexual assault, and that's a really common theme in a lot of crimes. Child abuse, how women are treated. Abuse really becomes a cycle, and in the book, they talk about how much abuse in formative years can influence who you are as an adult. We found a few statistics that kind of relate to that. We know that Kaya was abused and neglected as a child, and later in her life, she was also abused by someone she thought of as a partner. Children abused are 4 times more likely to experience domestic abuse as adults than children that were not abused. There are 4 main types of abuse, and the more type endured by a child, the more likely they are to be abused later in life. Of the children that experience all 4 types of abuse, 77% of them experience domestic abuse as adults. Over a third of children that experienced abuse from a family member were later abused by a partner. And 34% of people that just witnessed abuse, that didn't necessarily experience it themselves, but witnessed it in their home as children, would later be abused as adults. And women that were abused as children were 4 times more likely to be sexually assaulted as adults than men. So Kaya was very abused as a child and very neglected, and later on, unfortunately, experienced that as an adult. These statistics really play into her life in the book as well. Abuse also leads to higher rates of mental illness and drug and alcohol addictions. It's just a really vicious cycle, especially for a lot of women in the system. Abuse as a child can really up their chances of being abused as adults by partners. We know domestic abuse is such a huge issue all over the world, and it's really hard for women in the system because a lot of them are not treated well, they're not believed, evidence that's crucial to their case isn't allowed in court, psychology is ignored, victims are dismissed because they stayed with the abuser or let them into the house or didn't report it. But we know that it can be so hard for women in that situation to report it, to find a safe place to go, to have a safe way of getting out of it. So judging someone based on how they're coping with that is just blaming them for their situation, and that's the worst thing you can possibly do.
And even though we're focusing mainly on the abuse towards females in our topics related to true crime today, it is good to keep in mind that men can also be facing domestic abuse and child abuse. Actually pretty equal percentages. Both of them are roughly 50-50 when it comes to which gender gets abused as children and in domestic situations. So even though we're talking about females, we're not taking by any means away from the male side of things. It's just that Kaya was a female, so we'll be focusing on the way women have been treated in these types of situations. One case that we're going to talk about is about a woman named Latoya Ramsour. Latoya had a boyfriend named Devon Roy, and he was 6 years older than she was and was known to be abusive to her. She had a daughter, she worked as a medical assistant, so she had a lot going on, but she still put up with his abuse since they had known each other for so long. He had assaulted her for years, about 30 times since she started dating him at the age of 13. Eventually, she filed a protection from abuse order against Roy. This just caused more of an uproar. In April 2018, Roy sent a message to Latoya saying, quote, "You touch any of my shit, I guarantee your daughter will be missing 2 parents because I'm going to jail and I'm going to put you in the grave." End quote. That's just a chilling text to receive, and I'm sure that she put up her defense and was ready to fight for her life and for her daughter. So when he arrived, he assaulted her and her mother. Latoya proceeded to grab a gun from his stuff and shot him 5 times. She then called the police for help, and Devon Roy did not live through the incident. In court, she showed the messages that he had sent her and the photos of physical abuse that she had endured from Roy, and she was ultimately found not guilty. She had a PFA form against him, and he came to her home after texting threats to her phone. So this was enough for the court to let her off, to consider it more of her defending herself and her family.
Another sort of similar case is that of Brittany Smith. And she was doing a favor for a friend, picking him up when he didn't have a car, and he attacked her really brutally. And this attack went on over hours, and he even had her go to the store and pick up things like cigarettes. And the cashier at the store saw how bad off she was and asked her if she was okay. And Brittany passed her a note and tried to get help that way. Later on, her attacker threatened her and told her not to tell anybody about what had happened or he would kill her. And later, they ended up back at her house, and her brother was there. Todd, the man that was attacking Brittany, and Chris, Brittany's brother, got into an altercation, and Brittany ended up shooting Todd and killing him because he was trying to kill both of them. Brittany went through a pretty horrible ordeal with the whole case. At first, she tried to say that her brother did it because she knew that women are often marginalized in the court system there, and they really attacked her and tried to destroy her character rather than going after the character of the man who attacked her, who was a pretty awful person and had been a repeated abuser, and just showed what kind of character he had over and over again. So that's just another of many cases of women who go on to kill their attackers and abusers. There's a lot of other cases too of women killing traffickers and abusers. I know the Centoya Brown Long case has been in the news a lot lately, and Crystal Kaiser and cases like that kind of play into this too, because they're abused, often starting when they're young children, and go through years and years of abuse and end up killing their abusers. And sometimes they're convicted, sometimes they're not. So it's sort of interesting and sad to see that play out over and over again.
And that kind of wraps up our talk about Where the Crawdads Sing. We hope that you really liked this book. And if you didn't, let us know why. If you did, let us know why. Part of me feels like we are more passionate about this book than most others. We both really enjoyed it and all that it had to offer. And we can't wait to see what Delia Owens makes next, because I guarantee it's going to be a great one.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to reading her nonfiction books too. I think that's really cool. I think she's one of my heroes and doing kind of the same thing I want to do. So that's pretty cool. But yeah, like Hallie said, we really want to hear your feedback. We want these episodes to be kind of a dialogue. We want to know what you thought about it, what cases came to mind when you read the book, what your favorite parts and least favorite parts were. So definitely let us know. We have a contact page on our website. You can talk to us on Instagram. You can talk to us on YouTube comments. You can join our Abyss Facebook group, which is a private group where we do kind of more in-depth discussions and updates and things like that on the cases that we cover. So we'd love if you would join us over there and just tell us all about your thoughts.
Now for the reveal of next month's book. It will be The Butterfly Garden by Dot Hutchison. This episode will come out on April 3rd, and we really look forward to talking to you about this. We feel like there's going to be a lot of true crime relations that we can do with it. If you are interested in buying this book for our book club, we will have a link on our website. So go on there. You can see information about the cases we've talked about today, as well as seeing the new book link and be able to order it from Amazon or off Audible, whichever you prefer.
Yeah, and just a heads up, if any of you have Kindle Unlimited, this book is actually free through that. So the audiobook too, so you can read it either the ebook or the audiobook if you have Kindle Unlimited. It's genuinely one of my favorite books that I've ever read, so I'm really, really excited to talk to you guys about it. So the summary from Amazon of The Butterfly Garden is: near an isolated mansion lies a beautiful garden. In this garden grow luscious flowers, shady trees, and a collection of precious butterflies, young women who have been kidnapped and intricately tattooed to resemble their namesakes. Overseeing it all is the gardener, a brutal, twisted man obsessed with capturing and preserving his lovely specimens. When the garden is discovered, a survivor is brought in for questioning. FBI agents Victor Hanoverian and Brandon Edison are tasked with piecing together one of the most stomach-churning cases of their careers. But the girl, known only as Maya, proves to be a puzzle herself. As her story twists and turns, slowly shedding light on life in the butterfly garden, Maya reveals old grudges, new saviors, and horrific tales of a man who'd go to any length to hold beauty captive. But the more she shares, the more the agents have to wonder what she's still hiding.
Yes, we are very excited about this book to talk to you guys about it. Obviously, with us being a little bit ahead of you to be able to make the episodes, we really enjoyed it, and we want to hear your feedback. If you happen to finish it in a couple weeks and want to reach out to us and let us know what you thought before we make the episode, that would be amazing, and we would love to be able to add that kind of insight into our episodes.
Yeah, we would really like to add your input into future book club episodes and things like that. We're just getting started now. So we're still working out the details on how we want to format everything. But if you have parts that stood out to you or thoughts about the book, we really want to hear it. And we might someday include that kind of stuff into these episodes.
So don't forget, The Butterfly Garden by Dot Hutchison will be out on April 3rd, and we hope that you go ahead and get the book now and start reading it and join us on the day.
So thank you so much for tuning in to this episode. We hope you really like the book club. We love doing it, and we'll see you next time.
Bye!